Pick that up, sweetheart. That is what Pastor Gerald Whitfield said 47 minutes before the Army Rangers arrived. Laura Bennett kneels in St. Anthony's Fellowship Hall, her white volunteer polo spotless as she methodically restocks the first aid station near the vestibule, the scent of incense and old wood thick in the air. Her hands move with surgical precision, organizing supplies in the metal cabinet, gauze packets arranged by size, antiseptic bottles aligned, tourniquets hidden behind boxes of Band-Aids. A tarnished military challenge coin sits on her keychain, visible for half a second before she tucks it into her pocket. The metal catches the fluorescent light. Old scars cross her knuckles as she inventories the trauma shears, running her thumb across the blade. These hands have held lives together in places most people pray they never have to know about. Laura has been volunteering at St. Anthony's Church in San Antonio for exactly 3 months, her nursing credentials granting her access to the basement on Wednesday evenings, the veteran support group. 23 former soldiers gather there, several connected to missing military assets from Fallujah, equipment that disappeared during the 2004 offensive and was never accounted for. What Pastor Gerald Whitfield doesn't know is that Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett was placed here by Naval Intelligence, her cover so deep even the diocese believes she's real. Her nursing license is legitimate. Her credentials are immaculate. Her presence is deliberate. What she doesn't know yet, Whitfield has been redirecting veteran housing donations into offshore accounts for 18 months. $214,000 diverted from men and women who lost legs, lost arms, lost pieces of their minds in places like Fallujah. The quiet nurse who reviews financial reports during inventory is dangerously close to noticing the discrepancies. Whitfield's expensive Italian shoes click on the tile floor as he approaches. The sound carries across the fellowship hall like a warning. He is a man who has never worked in a hospital, never held a scalpel, never made a life-or-death decision in 6 seconds, but he carries himself as though the world should apologize for existing in his presence. His collar is pressed. His cufflinks are real gold. His smile doesn't reach his eyes, the smile of someone who has spent 2 decades practicing kindness he doesn't feel. Laura. He says her name the way someone says a word they've tasted and found it bitter. Parish council meeting tonight. 7 o'clock sharp. She doesn't look up. She continues organizing, her movements economical, her breathing steady. A steel cable doesn't need to respond to wind. It just bends and holds. I said there's a council meeting. His voice carries an edge now, the edge of a man accustomed to being obeyed. I heard you, Father. Her voice is quiet. Deferential. Thank you for letting me know. He waits for more. She doesn't give him more. She picks up another roll of gauze and slides it into place. The silence stretches. The fluorescent lights above hum their mechanical song. Somewhere in the church, the pipes creak with the sound of old water moving through older walls. Whitfield's jaw tightens. There's something we need to discuss about your commitment level. Laura's hands pause for exactly half a second. Not long enough for him to see it as anything but a flicker. She places the final gauze roll and closes the cabinet door. When she turns to face him, her expression is neutral, the face of someone who has learned not to show anything that could be used against her. The face of someone who has learned that survival sometimes looks like emptiness. Of course, Father. The parish council meeting begins at 7 o'clock in the office adjoining the sanctuary. There are 8 of them, 3 retired teachers, 2 real estate developers, a bank manager, Whitfield's administrative assistant, and a woman who inherited her wealth so long ago that she's forgotten what it felt like to earn it. Laura stands in the corner, her white polo still pristine, her hands folded in front of her. A volunteer. A nobody. Someone to make decisions about, not with. Whitfield sits at the head of the table, a position he chose for himself the day he arrived at St. Anthony's 8 years ago. His fingers are steepled, thumbs pressed together. The pose of a man about to make a pronouncement. I want to discuss the morale problem we're having with our volunteer staff, he begins. Specifically, our newest addition. He turns to face Laura. All 8 sets of eyes follow. I'll be honest with you all. I'm concerned about commitment. About whether someone can really dedicate themselves to this community when they know how little we're able to compensate them. The bank manager nods. The real estate developers exchange glances. Nobody speaks. So I'm going to make this simple. Whitfield's smile appears again, rehearsed, calculated. I'm betting $20 that our friend Laura here won't last another week once she realizes how little our help actually earns. Anyone want to take that bet? The silence is profound. The kind of silence where you can hear the rain starting outside, gentle at first, then heavier. One of the retired teachers shifts in her seat. The wealthy woman stares at her hands. Nobody takes the bet. Laura's jaw doesn't move. Her breathing doesn't change. The muscle in her left cheek, the one that would give away fear in most people, remains still as stone. She has been trained by the United States Navy to maintain composure while being shot at, while holding the intestines of a 17-year-old Marine in her hands, while watching people die and continuing to work. A parish priest with a $2,000 watch is not even a tremor. I think that's enough, Gerald. The voice comes from the back of the room. Sister Margaret, who has been at St. Anthony's for 43 years, stands up. She is 91 pounds of absolute authority. We're done here. Whitfield's face flushes. For a moment, he looks like he might argue. Then he stands instead, smoothing his slacks, adjusting his position in the room. The meeting dissolves. People gather papers. People make excuses. Within 8 minutes, the office is empty except for Laura and Whitfield. He watches her as she turns to leave. I'll see you Sunday, Laura. If you're still here. She doesn't respond. She walks toward the door. The next morning is Sunday. Coffee hour in the fellowship hall. The ritual is always the same. The ladies from the altar guild brew coffee that tastes like burnt rubber, arrange pastries on paper plates, set out the styrofoam cups and paper napkins. Laura is restocking, again, her supply tray balanced against her hip. Fresh bandages, antiseptic wipes, a small trauma kit for the arthritic knees and diabetic sores that always appeared during coffee hour. The fellowship hall is crowded. Maybe 70 people, clustered in small groups, holding cups, making the sounds of community. The smell of coffee mingles with old carpet and old money. Laura moves quietly through the crowd, acknowledging people with nods, stepping aside when necessary. A ghost in a white shirt. Whitfield stands near the coffee station, holding court with 3 parishioners, all of them listening to him talk about the new building fund. His voice is warm here, generous, the voice of a shepherd. He laughs at his own joke. The parishioners laugh with him. He is magnificent in his element. Then he turns. He sees Laura passing with her supply tray. For a moment, his eyes lock on the tarnished challenge coin hanging on her keychain, visible now because she's walking and the chain swings with her movement. Old metal. Tarnished silver. Foreign. He has never seen it before, and he sees everything his nurses wear. His expression shifts. Something ugly crosses his face. Then it's gone. Laura continues walking toward the far corner where she needs to restock the medical supplies. The tray is balanced perfectly, muscle memory from 1,000 deployments, 1,000 moments of moving through chaos with something precious in your hands. The tray holds 18 individual items, each one placed by feel, by weight distribution, by the kind of knowledge that lives in your body when your body has survived things most people can't imagine. She is 4 feet from the supply cabinet when Whitfield appears beside her. Let me help you with that, he says. She doesn't feel the arm coming. That's the problem. She sees him peripherally, but she's trained not to flinch at movement, not to react, not to telegraph anything. By the time she processes what he's doing, his arm has already made contact with her tray. The force is deliberate. The angle is precise. He sweeps his arm upward like he's clearing a table, and the tray launches. For a moment, everything moves in slow motion, the trajectory of each item arcing through the air, the dispersion pattern, the way gravity pulls them back down. Gauze packets scatter like snow. Antiseptic bottles clatter on tile. Bandages and antiseptic wipes cascade across the fellowship hall floor like someone has just knocked over a pharmacy. The sound is tremendous. The room goes dead silent. Parishioners stop mid-sentence. Conversations halt. Children freeze. All of them watching. Laura's hands remain at her sides. Her chest rises and falls with the same steady rhythm it had 3 seconds ago. Her face is absolutely still. Whitfield reaches into his pocket, pulls out her volunteer badge, the laminated card clipped to her pocket, and drops it onto the mess of supplies and spilled medication. It lands in a puddle of antiseptic. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he says, loud enough that everyone can hear. His voice carries the warmth of summer and the poison of a snake. "And maybe sweep up while you're down there. I'd hate for someone to slip." He walks away before she moves. That's the important part. He walks away. He doesn't stay to see what happens. He doesn't stay to watch her break. He assumes she will break because in his experience, women do. Women in volunteer positions do. Women without power do. They cry or they rage or they shrink. They give him the satisfaction of seeing it. Laura kneels. The tile is cool against her knees. Her hands, steady, scarred, capable of impossible things, begin collecting each item. The gauze packets first, one by one. She places them carefully in a pile. Then the antiseptic bottles, checking each for cracks. The smaller items go last. Her movements are methodical. Automatic. The room remains silent. She can feel the weight of 70 pairs of eyes. She doesn't look up. She simply continues, her white polo still spotless, her face still empty of everything except the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. The volunteer badge is the last thing she picks up. The laminate is waterproof. The water beads off. She holds it for a moment in her scarred palm, this plastic card that marks her as a volunteer, a helper, someone who exists in the space of other people's problems. Then she places it with the rest of the supplies and stands. "I'll get a mop," she says quietly. Her voice doesn't shake. It doesn't crack. It simply exists, a sound like everything is fine, like nothing has happened. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part comes 3 hours later, after the church has emptied, after the supplies are restocked, after Laura has mopped the fellowship hall floor until it gleams. She is alone in the supply closet, a small space, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, lined with metal shelving and the smell of bleach. Her hands grip the edge of the lowest shelf. The metal is cold. The coolness is real. The feeling is real. This is the moment where she allows it. One breath. Just one. A shaking breath that comes from somewhere deep in her chest, somewhere she keeps locked away from the world. Her forehead presses against the cool metal shelf. Her eyes close. For 6 seconds, maybe 7, she is not a volunteer nurse. She is not invisible. She is something else entirely. She is something wounded. She is something angry. She is something that remembers watching a 7-year-old boy collapse in the dust of Fallujah, remembers running toward him while rounds tore into the earth around her feet, remembers holding his small body together with her hands while she called for a medevac that wouldn't arrive for another 18 minutes. Then the breath ends. The moment ends. The mask slides back into place like a visor coming down. Laura straightens. She releases the shelf. She opens her eyes. When she walks out of the supply closet, she is calm again. She is deferential again. She is the kind of invisible that keeps people alive because they never see you coming. The challenge coin in her pocket feels heavier than it did this morning. The weight of 20 years. The weight of a promise kept. She doesn't know yet that the boy from Fallujah, now a man, now an army ranger, now something that the Pentagon has been looking for, is about to walk through the doors of St. Anthony's Church in exactly 5 days. She doesn't know that her cover is about to collapse like a building demolition. She doesn't know that everything Whitfield did today was motivated by fear of what she might discover. All she knows is that she has 1 week to find the proof. 7 days to identify the network. 7 days before her mark disappears again into the classified shadows where military assets vanish. She walks toward the parking lot. It is raining now, the kind of rain that sounds like applause on concrete. Her white volunteer polo is still spotless. The rain stopped at exactly 6:47 on a Thursday evening, the kind of silence that follows applause. Laura stood in the sacristy, her white volunteer polo still spotless, folding donated linens with the precise efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that small, repetitive tasks quieted the mind. Outside, the church parking lot gleamed like wet concrete reflecting sodium lights. Inside, the walls smelled of old wooden furniture polish, the scent of accumulated faith and weekly maintenance. Pastor Whitfield's voice carried down the corridor before his body appeared. "Laura. My office. We need to discuss supply management." It wasn't a request. It was the tone of a man who had never learned the difference between authority and permission. The parish council meeting was already underway when she entered the cramped office behind the sanctuary. The council members sat around a table that was too large for the room, their chairs wedged between filing cabinets and a decades-old copy machine. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in the color of institutional fluorescence. Whitfield sat at the head, his hands folded, his expression wearing the kind of calm that precedes a trap being sprung. "Gentlemen," Whitfield began, not bothering to acknowledge Laura's entrance, "I've been thinking about staffing efficiency. Our volunteer here has been with us 3 months now, and I'm beginning to wonder about her long-term commitment." He leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "In fact, I'm placing a wager, $20 says our little helper quits within a week when she realizes how little we compensate our help. Anyone want in on that?" He glanced around the table with the expression of a man ordering appetizers at a restaurant. The council members shifted. One cleared his throat. Nobody took the bet. Laura stood near the doorway, her hands resting at her sides. Her jaw tightened, just barely, a movement so small that only someone trained in reading human beings under stress would have caught it. Her face remained neutral, the face of a woman who had learned that reactions were currency and hers was not for spending. "I volunteer here because I believe in the mission, Pastor." Her voice was steady, almost musical in its evenness. "The mission supports veterans who have sacrificed everything. That seems worth unpaid hours." Whitfield smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just confirmed his suspicions. "The mission. Right. Tell me, Laura, did you actually finish nursing school, or is this one of those online certificate things you pick up in 6 weeks? He made air quotes with his fingers, the gesture so contemptuous it hung in the air like cigarette smoke. "I ask because real credentials tend to come with oversight. Background checks. References who remember you." The challenge was precise. He was testing her story, probing for inconsistencies in her cover. Laura had expected this. The Navy's cover identity was bulletproof, a fabricated employment history at a VA clinic in Houston, references that would hold under phone verification, a social security number that traced back to a legitimate civilian nursing license issued in 2019. Whitfield's network was competent, but not that competent. "Not yet. I have my credentials on file," Laura said simply. "You reviewed them during intake." "Credentials," Whitfield repeated, still making air quotes as if the word itself was a lie. He turned to the council members. "You see, this is what concerns me. Our volunteer is here to help, but I'm questioning whether she's actually qualified to help. Can any of you verify that a Laura Bennett actually worked at the Veterans Affairs Clinic in Houston?" He was being strategic now, establishing doubt among his allies before moving to the next phase. "Because I called. Left messages. Nobody remembers her." This was stage 2 of the escalation. Social attacks had evolved into strategic positioning. He had already begun weaponizing her legitimacy, creating a narrative where her presence became a liability rather than an asset. What he didn't know was that the VA clinic's reference line would accept calls only during specific hours, and when they did, they would confirm employment with a woman who had existed there only in paperwork and digital records. The phones can be difficult to reach, Laura replied. But the documentation is in the file. I'm happy to provide additional verification if you'd like to contact the State Nursing Board directly. The offer was a trap of her own making. The State Nursing Board would confirm her license. The documentation would be flawless. And in confirming her credentials, Whitfield would either have to accept her legitimacy or escalate to the next phase, outright accusation. He wasn't ready for that yet. He still needed her gone quietly. Whitfield stood. Well, let's move forward with the assumption that you're who you say you are. But I want the council to understand the risks of having unvetted personnel in our medical station. What if something goes wrong? Who's liable? He was shifting the narrative now, moving from questioning her qualifications to questioning her liability. Insurance concerns. Legal exposure. The language of institutional power. The council members began nodding in unison, the way people do when they're being herded toward a predetermined conclusion. The meeting ended without resolution, which was exactly the point. Whitfield had planted the seeds of doubt, positioned himself as the voice of caution, and established that Laura's presence was becoming a problem. He hadn't fired her yet, that would come later, after he'd softened the ground with accusations and complaints. This was stage 3, strategic restriction. Create the conditions where her departure would seem inevitable, almost merciful. 3 days later, on Sunday morning, the fellowship hall filled after Mass with the smell of coffee and the murmur of 60 parishioners. Laura carried a metal tray of first aid supplies through the crowd, weaving between clusters of conversation, balancing bandages and antiseptic bottles and sterile gauze packages. The tray was heavy, perhaps 8 pounds, and she moved with the careful precision of someone carrying something precious. Whitfield stood near the coffee station, gesturing broadly as he told a story about a failed plumbing repair, his hands moving in wide arcs. He didn't look directly at her. He didn't need to. As Laura passed, his elbow connected with the metal tray in a collision that was perfectly timed, perfectly angled. The impact wasn't gentle. The tray flipped. The contents scattered across the tile floor with a crash that echoed off the vaulted ceiling, bandages spinning, bottles rolling, sterile packages skittering across the polished surface. The room went silent. 70 faces turned toward the sound, toward Laura, toward the small explosion of medical supplies at her feet. Whitfield looked down at the mess with feigned surprise, then at Laura with something that resembled pity. He reached down and picked up her volunteer badge, a small plastic card clipped to her polo, and tossed it onto the pile of supplies with a gesture that was both dismissive and deliberate. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "That's what we pay you for." "Oh wait, we don't pay you at all." He laughed. A short, cruel sound. Some of the parishioners laughed with him. Others looked away, the way people do when they're witnessing something they know is wrong but lack the courage to stop. Laura knelt. Her movements were methodical, economical. She picked up the first bandage. Then the second. Then the third. One by one, her hands moved through the scattered supplies, collecting, organizing, her face utterly blank. A council member bent to help, but Whitfield waved him off with a gesture that was almost violent. "She's fine. Isn't that right, Laura? You're used to cleaning up messes." Her breathing remained controlled. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. The rhythm of someone who had learned to separate her body from her mind, to partition her emotions into compartments that could be sealed and labeled and shelved away. She collected the supplies. She picked up her volunteer badge. She stood. She carried the tray to the cleaning station. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody approached her. The conversation around the fellowship hall resumed, but it had changed. There was a current running through it now, an awareness that something unkind had occurred and that nobody had stopped it. The supply closet was small, barely more than a closet in truth, with metal shelving on 3 walls and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Laura set the tray down on the middle shelf. She pressed her forehead against the cool metal of the upper shelf, her eyes closed. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. but something inside her, something she had learned to control but never quite conquered, began to shake. One breath. Just one. Her body trembling like a tuning fork, like something wound too tight, like a vessel that had been holding pressure for 3 months and finally, briefly, lost its seal. The trembling lasted for seconds. Then she straightened. Her hand stilled. Her jaw set. The mask returned, smooth and impenetrable, and when she opened her eyes and saw her reflection in the polished surface of a cabinet door, she was looking at a woman who had just made a decision. Wednesday evening Mass brought the rain back, a soft percussion against the stained glass windows of St. Anthony's. The congregation was smaller now, perhaps 60 parishioners scattered across pews that could have held 200. The organ played softly, a Bach prelude, as Father Rodriguez distributed communion to a line of the faithful. Laura sat in the back pew near the medical station, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes scanning the crowd with the systematic precision of someone conducting a threat assessment. This was the real work. The work she had been sent here to do. The church's weekly veteran support group attracted 20 to 30 soldiers recovering from trauma, and Whitfield's embezzlement scheme was connected to the supply chain that had moved through Fallujah 5 years ago. The weapons that had disappeared from the 2nd Battalion Armory had surfaced in 3 different conflicts since then, and the trail had led here, to this church, to this pastor with his hand in the collection plate and his finger in a network that reached much deeper than anyone knew. A gaunt man in his late 20s entered halfway through the service. His army surplus jacket hung loose on his frame, the kind of loose that speaks to recent weight loss, to stress, to the particular metabolism of someone living in a state of low-level crisis. He slid into a pew 3 rows ahead of Laura, his head bowed. His left hand was gripping something metallic, she could see the glint of it, the oxidized sheen of something old and valuable. Laura's pulse didn't increase. Her breathing didn't change. She simply noted the detail and filed it away, one more data point in a pattern that was slowly resolving into clarity. 5 minutes later, during Father Rodriguez's homily on the nature of mercy, the man gasped. Not a normal breath. A desperate, wet sound, the audio equivalent of drowning. His body convulsed, and he collapsed into the aisle with a weight that suggested complete loss of muscle control. Parishioners screamed. Someone shouted for 911. People pulled back, the way a crowd instinctively retreats from contagion, from trauma, from the physical reality of suffering. Laura was beside him in 4 seconds. She didn't run. Running attracted attention. She simply moved with purpose, her volunteer polo already being rolled up at the sleeves as she knelt. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, the carotid pulse, and found it thready, irregular. His jugular vein was distended. His heart sounds, when she pressed her ear to his chest, were muffled by fluid. Cardiac tamponade. Blood filling the pericardial sac, pressure building around the heart, the organ strangling in its own membrane. Without intervention, he had perhaps for minutes before cardiac arrest. The math was simple. The solution was elementary. Cardiac tamponade, she said to nobody in particular, her voice suddenly carrying the weight of authority, the voice of someone who had seen this before, who had fixed it before, who knew exactly what needed to happen next. She tore open his shirt, the buttons scattering. Whitfield pushed through the growing crowd, his face red, his voice high. "What are you doing? Get away from him. Someone call 911. He grabbed her shoulder with the grip of a man accustomed to being obeyed, to having his orders followed without question. Laura pulled a hollow-point pen from her pocket and her folding knife from her ankle sheath, the knife she wasn't supposed to have, the weapon she carried in violation of 17 different regulations because some truths about the world couldn't be ignored. She sterilized the blade with communion wine from a nearby chalice. The priest stared, frozen, as she made a precise incision below the xiphoid process, the anatomy as clear in her mind as a map, as a blueprint she had memorized 20 years ago in a trauma facility in Fallujah where the wounded came faster than anyone could count them. "Stop playing doctor and wait for the paramedics." Whitfield's grip tightened. She shrugged him off without looking, without acknowledging his presence as anything more significant than an obstacle. The hollow pen barrel went in at exactly the right angle, and she aspirated the bloody fluid from the pericardial sac. 10 seconds, 20, the man's color improving, his breathing steadying as the pressure released and his heart was allowed to beat again. Her hands were rock steady. Her focus was absolute. The world had compressed to the size of a human chest and a problem that needed solving. Paramedics arrived as the man's oxygen saturation climbed from 68 to 82 to 92%. One of them stared at her technique, recognition flickering across his face. "Who taught you to do a pericardiocentesis?" he asked, loading the man onto the stretcher with practiced efficiency. Laura didn't answer. She simply stood, her polo now stained with blood that looked almost black under the fluorescent lights of the sanctuary, and watched as they carried him out into the rain. As the stretcher passed through the doors, something fell from the man's clenched fist and rolled across the tile. A challenge coin, tarnished to the color of old copper, oxidized by 5 years of being clutched in a soldier's hand. Laura picked it up. The markings were clear: Fallujah, 2nd Battalion, the unit connected to the weapons that had disappeared, the shipment she had been sent here to track. The extraction target. The reason she had spent 3 months folding linens and restocking supplies and accepting humiliation from a pastor who didn't understand that he was standing next to a Master Chief Petty Officer with a 23-year service record and 4 Navy Crosses. In the corner of the sanctuary, Whitfield was already on his phone, his face darker than the rain outside, his jaw clenched so tightly his entire head seemed to vibrate with fury. But that wasn't the worst part. What happened next didn't just silence the room. What happened next was going to end everything Whitfield had built. The organ fell silent mid-chord. The note just stopped, hanging in the vaulted ceiling like a held breath. A man in the third pew, gaunt, mid-20s, the uniform jacket draped on his frame like it belonged to someone else, went rigid. His body convulsed once. Twice. His jaw locked and his eyes rolled back white as communion wafers. Laura was already moving before anyone else processed what was happening. The pew creaked as she stood. Her hands knew this rhythm from 20 years ago in Fallujah, from a boy with shrapnel in his chest and the same glassy-eyed panic flickering across his face in the seconds before consciousness went dark. This wasn't a seizure. This was the body screaming that something was compressing the heart. Cardiac tamponade. Fluid building around the myocardium like water in a drowning man's lungs, except the drowning was happening inside his own chest. She was beside him in 3 seconds. The parishioners froze, elderly women with rosaries, young families, a Vietnam vet in the back pew who went perfectly still when he saw her kneel. Her fingers found the space between his ribs, the 4th intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Her medical knowledge, so carefully buried for 3 months under the white polo shirt and the volunteer badge, suddenly rose to the surface like a corpse breaking through ice. "He's coding," she said. "No, please. No apology. Just fact." The voice that came out was not a nurse's voice. It was a command structure voice. "Someone get me a pen. Ballpoint. Hollow point. Now." Pastor Whitfield was still in the pulpit, his face cycling through shock and fury like a malfunctioning marquee. He didn't move. A young man in the front row, a deacon, maybe 20, fumbled in his jacket pocket and thrust a pen toward her. She took it without looking at him. Her other hand was already opening the pocket knife attached to her volunteer badge lanyard, the one she carried for opening supply boxes. She flicked the blade open. The metal caught the vaulted light. "Step back," she said to the deacon. "Everyone. Give me space." The man convulsed again, his body resting with the physics of cardiac arrest. His lips were turning the color of old bruises. Laura uncapped the pen with her teeth, exposing the ballpoint tube inside. She held the knife blade under the sanctuary lamp, the flame that never went out, and the stainless steel went bright for a moment, sterilized in the thin heat of consecrated fire. Communion wine sat in a silver cup on the altar table. She reached back without looking and someone, the deacon again, placed it in her hand. She poured wine across the blade, watching it run red and translucent, burning away microseconds of infection in the alcohol sting. "I need to access his pericardium," she said. She wasn't explaining. She was narrating. The fluid around his heart is restricting his cardiac output. In 90 seconds he'll arrest completely. In 2 minutes he'll be brain dead. In 4 minutes he'll be dead. Her hands moved on their own. Muscle memory. 20 years of combat medicine. The knife went in clean between the 4th and 5th ribs, the blade sliding between the intercostal muscles with almost no resistance, a surgeon's precision. Blood welled dark around the entry point. The man gasped, his body bucking with the invasion of the blade. Laura's face remained perfectly flat. This wasn't happening in a sterile operating room at Walter Reed or Bethesda. This was happening in the center aisle of St. Anthony's Church in San Antonio, and there would be consequences, but right now there was only the fluid and the patient and the 3 seconds between now and brain death. She withdrew the knife. She inserted the hollow ballpoint tube through the puncture wound, pushing with surgical exactness until she felt the give of the pericardial sac, that thin membrane holding everything together. She angled it downward. She pushed another inch. The hiss of air escaping from around the tube. Pressurized air leaving a space that was crushing a human heart. Dark fluid, sanguineous, mixed with blood, began to flow backward through the ballpoint tube, dripping into her palm. Not a geyser. Not a spray. Just the steady drainage of death being reversed in real time. His O2 sat, she said. Not a question. 78 and dropping, someone said behind her. A nurse from somewhere, from the pews, understanding the numbers. The fear in her voice was immediate and primal. Watch the monitor. Tell me when it changes. Laura kept her hand perfectly steady. The fluid kept draining. Her fingers registered the subtle shift in the man's chest, the cardiac compression beginning to ease, the pressure in his thoracic cavity normalizing like a tire being slowly deflated. She could feel his heart underneath the pericardium, could sense the rhythm trying to assert itself again. 84, the nurse called out. Keep draining, Laura said to herself, or maybe to the universe, to the God who apparently worked through hollow-point pens and communion wine and the stubborn muscle memory of a woman who had spent 2 decades burying the person she actually was. 89. The man's eyes began to move. Consciousness flickering back like a light switch. His breathing became less panicked, less that drowning from the inside sound. His heart was still arrhythmic, she could feel it jumping under her palm like something trapped in a cage, but it was beating. It was beating. 92 and stabilizing, the nurse said. And that was when Pastor Whitfield's voice cut through the sanctuary like a blade. Stop. He descended from the pulpit in 2 strides. Stop this immediately. You're not a doctor. You have no authority to perform surgery on this man. Call 911. Call 911 right now. Someone get her away from him. Laura didn't look up. Her hand remained steady. The fluid was still draining. The man's color was beginning to return, that gray death shade fading to something approaching human again. Step back. Whitfield's voice had shifted from shock to fury to something worse, professional authority trying to reassert control. This is a liability nightmare. You're unauthorized. You're performing medicine without a license. His heart rate is stabilizing, Laura said quietly, still watching the fluid, still monitoring the man's color, still tracking the subtle shifts in his body that meant he was being pulled back from the edge. He's going to live. That's not your call to make. That's not your role here. You're a volunteer. You're destroying this church's insurance standing. If I stop now, he'll code again in 90 seconds. Her voice was absolutely flat. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't angry. It was the voice of someone stating mathematical certainty. His pericardium will reaccumulate fluid. His heart will compress again. And he will die while you're still talking. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a room full of people watching someone choose between following the rules and watching someone die. The silence of a hierarchy being challenged. The silence of hidden truth beginning to surface like blood in water. Whitfield's face went the color of old bruises. His mouth opened and closed. He looked at the man on the floor, then at Laura's steady hands, then at the deacon and the other nurse and the Vietnam vet in the back pew who was watching with an expression that suggested he understood exactly what he was witnessing. But what he didn't understand, what nobody in St. Anthony's Church understood in that moment, was that this single act of medical expertise had just blown apart 3 months of careful cover. Laura Bennett, volunteer parish nurse, had revealed something that couldn't be unspoken, something that couldn't be forgotten. The competence. The authority. The absolute certainty that came from having done this before, having held this exact balance between life and death in her hands before. And Pastor Whitfield, standing in the center aisle with his fists clenched and his face flushed with impotent rage, was already calculating how to remove her before she saw anything else. Before she understood what he was really doing with the church's money. Before she connected the dots that her presence, her actual presence, her real identity, was designed to connect. The man on the floor gasped air into his lungs. His eyes focused. The tubes of the ballpoint pen were still in place, still draining, still saving his life. But it was already too late to put the truth back into the bottle. That night, Pastor Whitfield sat in his office with the door locked, his fingers moving across his phone with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to dismantle a person. The tarnished challenge coin the Ranger had been clutching sat on his desk. He'd taken it from the medical bag before paramedics arrived, pocketed it like a trophy. He didn't understand what it meant, only that Laura had moved with purpose toward it, that her eyes had tracked it with something beyond medical concern. That meant it was valuable. That meant it was leverage. He dialed the diocesan board first, his voice smooth as motor oil. I need to report a serious incident involving a volunteer at St. Anthony's. She performed surgery. Actual surgery. In the center aisle during Mass. No license, no authorization, complete disregard for parish liability. The voice on the other end, Bishop Hammond, 300 miles away in Austin, went very still. Tell me everything. Whitfield did. He added details that weren't true, that Laura had refused to stop even when he'd ordered her to, that she'd been reckless with the man's life, that her credentials were questionable. I have her references right here, Whitfield continued, which was a lie. VA clinic in San Antonio. I'm calling them next. He hung up before Hammond could ask questions he didn't want to answer, then pulled up the VA clinic's number on his computer. His hand hovered over the phone. This was the moment. Make this call and there was no taking it back. But the woman had humiliated him in front of his entire parish by being better at medicine than he could ever be, by showing the congregation that courage looked nothing like his authority. By making him look small. The cursor blinked. He dialed. VA San Antonio, how can I direct your call? A woman's voice, professional and distant. Whitfield became someone else on the phone, concerned, official, reasonable. A pastor checking references on a volunteer. Could they confirm employment and credentials for a Laura Bennett? There was a pause. A database search. Then, I'm not showing a Laura Bennett in our current system or our records from the past 7 years. Are you sure that's the name? Whitfield's pulse quickened. He'd expected her to be in the system. He'd expected to verify her background, to find inconsistencies, to build his case on facts. Instead, she wasn't there at all. Which meant either the VA had no record of her, or the record didn't exist because she'd never actually worked there. Which meant either she was lying, or she was something else entirely. Thank you, he said, keeping his voice level. That's helpful. He hung up and sat in the fluorescent silence of his office, the weight of what he'd just uncovered settling like a stone in his chest. She was lying. But about what? And how deep did it go? He couldn't call the board back and tell them the references didn't exist. That would sound like he hadn't done basic verification before letting her into the church. That would sound like his fault. So instead, he did what men like him always did when they felt threatened. He escalated. He called church lawyers. He called his friend at the insurance company. He filed a liability claim against the parish for her unauthorized medical procedure, a procedure that had, technically, legally, violated dozens of regulations. She could have killed him, Whitfield told the lawyer, whose name was Morrison and who had a yacht and owed Whitfield favors. We need to protect ourselves. Documentation. The incident report I'm filing. Her volunteers should be revoked immediately, pending investigation. Morrison understood. Men like Morrison always understood. By Friday morning, the paperwork was official. By Friday afternoon, the parish board had voted to terminate Laura's volunteer status, effective immediately. Whitfield watched her come in that evening to collect her things. She didn't look angry. She didn't look anything. She took the white polo shirt from her locker, the one with the embroidered cross on the pocket, and held it with both hands like she was carrying something sacred. Her eyes were flat. Empty. The kind of empty that comes from having expected exactly this. He wanted her to cry. He wanted to see her break. He watched from across the fellowship hall as she folded the polo with methodical precision, sleeves tucked in, bottom third folded up, top third folded down, the creases sharp enough to cut. The movement was so controlled, so practiced, so utterly devoid of emotion, that Whitfield felt something twist in his gut. This wasn't the reaction of someone broken. This was the reaction of someone transitioning. Of someone putting on a different role. He turned away, uneasy, and didn't watch her leave. That night, alone in her apartment on the North Star District's eastern edge, Laura Bennett sat at her kitchen table with the folded polo shirt in front of her like a surrender flag. The streetlights outside cast everything in sodium orange. She had one small window overlooking the parking lot, one bedroom, one bathroom, a kitchenette that still smelled like the previous tenant's curry. This was the cover apartment. Not hers. Nothing was hers anymore. The phone on the table buzzed, encrypted message, routed through 3 servers, no sender ID visible. Extraction protocol initiated. Cover compromised. Return to base Sunday 0600 hours. Stand by for transport. She didn't respond. The soldier she'd saved, the Ranger, had been airlifted to Brooke Army Medical Center under full military security before she'd even finished the pericardiocentesis. MPs had taken him. She'd never gotten close enough to examine the tarnished challenge coin, never confirmed its connection to the Fallujah weapons network, never traced it back through the smuggling ring she'd been hunting for 3 months. The mission was over. It had ended the moment his hands had closed around that coin and she'd realized what it meant: proof. Connection. Everything she'd been building toward. And it was gone. She picked up the polo shirt. The fabric was soft from repeated washing, worn thin in the places she'd held it most. She thought about the woman who had walked into St. Anthony's 3 months ago, the one with steady hands and a nursing credential and a role that fit like a second skin. That woman was finished. The folding took 5 minutes. She placed the polo in a canvas bag along with her volunteer badge and the handwritten resignation letter she prepared an hour after leaving the church. No explanation. No forwarding address. Just a date, Friday, and a signature, L. Bennett. The bag sat on her kitchen table like a closed chapter. Saturday passed in silence. She didn't leave the apartment. She didn't check her encrypted phone. She lay on the bed fully clothed and stared at the water stain on the ceiling and counted the hours until Sunday morning. At 5:38 a.m., Sunday morning, Laura sat in her car, a 2018 Civic, registered to a false name, paid for in cash if parked in the St. Anthony's lot. The church was dark except for the sanctuary lights, always left burning. The canvas bag sat on the passenger seat. She should be driving to the naval base. Extraction protocol clear. Stand by for transport. But something pulled her back here, back to this place, back to the folded shirt and the failed mission and the coin she'd never touched. She got out of the car. The air was cool, that particular Texas morning cool that comes before the heat remembers itself. Her boots echoed on the asphalt, combat boots, not nurse's shoes, because she'd stopped pretending somewhere around midnight Friday. The church was unlocked. St. Anthony's never locked its doors. She walked through the lobby, past the donation baskets, past the bulletin board with its cheerful announcements about bake sales and youth groups. The administrative office door was open. The laundry bin sat in its corner, overflowing with choir robes and altar cloths and the detritus of parish life. She placed the canvas bag in her other hand and took out the folded polo. The fabric moved like water as she set it on top of the pile, smoothing it one final time. Her fingers traced the cross on the pocket. Goodbye, she thought. Not to the church. Not to Whitfield. To the person who had folded that shirt with gentle hands and believed in quiet service. That person didn't exist anymore. The office door opened behind her. Laura? You can't be here. Pastor Whitfield said, the church secretary, Mrs. Hendricks, 72 years old, volunteer coordinator, good woman, completely unaware of anything. I'm just returning this, Laura said, and her voice came out different. Not the soft, deferential tone of the parish nurse. Something underneath. Something that sounded like someone who'd given orders in languages Mrs. Hendricks would never speak. She turned toward the door, and that's when she heard it. The lobby television. The one that played the local news on weekend mornings. Her own face filled the screen. Not the gentle photo the parish newsletter used, not the soft smile of the volunteer. Her official Navy portrait in dress blues, the one taken 3 years ago, hair military short, eyes the color of a winter Atlantic. The anchor's voice filled the quiet church. Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett, a decorated combat medic, reported missing after a classified operation. The Navy has released her photo in connection with an ongoing federal investigation into weapons smuggling and international arms trafficking. If you see this woman, you are advised to contact the Naval Criminal Investigative Service immediately. Do not approach. Her extraction window had just closed. And behind her, through the sanctuary doors, she could hear the early arrivals for Sunday service beginning to stream in, their footsteps and morning greetings echoing through the spaces where secrets used to hide. The doors opened wider. More people entered. And somewhere in the darkness of the sanctuary, preparations were being made for something none of them understood yet. Sunday morning. 6:15 a.m. Laura sat in her unmarked sedan in the St. Anthony's parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to turn her knuckles white. Rain hammered the windshield like artillery fire. She stared at the church entrance, mentally cataloguing extraction protocols. The safe house in Corpus Christi. The burn phone in her glove compartment. The 48-hour window before naval intelligence would assume her cover was compromised and move her to a new assignment, a new name, a new life with nobody to answer to but ghosts. Her eyes drifted to the lobby television visible through the glass doors. CNN. Breaking news banner in bright red. The volume was muted, but the graphics told the story Laura already knew was coming. Her photograph flashed across the screen, official Navy headshot, Master Chief Petty Officer insignia crisp and gleaming. The chyron scrolled underneath, decorated combat medic reported missing after covert operation. Missing. Not fired. Not humiliated by some parish priest who didn't understand what he was dealing with. Missing. Someone had activated her. Someone up the chain had decided the cover was expendable and the legend needed air. Laura's jaw clenched. She'd spent 11 months building that cover layer by layer, every insult absorbed, every indignity catalogued, every moment of restraint calculated to keep Pastor Whitfield believing she was exactly what she appeared to be, a tired volunteer nurse with a mild expression and hands that never shook. The rain intensified. Thunder rolled across San Antonio like distant ordnance. At 7:43 a.m., 3 Army Rangers in dress uniforms walked through the church doors. Not tactical. Not armed. Just 3 men in sharp greens with the kind of bearing that made civilians instinctively step aside. Behind them, another figure emerged from the rain. The soldier Laura had saved. The one with the tarnished challenge coin from Fallujah who'd spent 20 years becoming lethal enough to deserve the title Ranger. His face was harder now, scarred by desert sun and combat deployment, but his eyes held the same gratitude they had when she performed pericardiocentesis in the center aisle while his heart was drowning in its own fluid. He walked into St. Anthony's Church like a man walking into his own coronation. At 7:51 a.m., the church security guard, a Vietnam veteran named Holloway who'd been nothing but kind to Laura since she arrived, went rigid at the sanctuary entrance. His parade ground voice cut through the morning quiet with the kind of snap that made 50 years collapse into 5 seconds. Master Chief on deck. Every head in the church turned. Parishioners mid-coffee froze. The altar boys stopped moving. Even Pastor Whitfield, standing in his vestments near the tabernacle, felt the air pressure change like a barometer before a hurricane. The ranger stepped into the center aisle. His voice was low and carried the weight of metal on metal. Condor 7. The words hung in the sanctuary like a challenge coin suspended in mid-air, spinning. Reflecting light. Catching everyone's attention before it landed. Laura was still in her car. But her hands had just released the steering wheel. At 8:04 a.m., a 2-star general entered St. Anthony's through the main doors, flanked by officers in dress blues. His insignia caught the morning light filtering through the stained glass windows. Behind him walked 3 federal agents in dark suits, moving with the deliberate spacing of people trained to secure perimeters. The general carried a file folder. Thick. Official. Stamped with a classification header that made the diocesan staff's faces drain of color. The general approached the pulpit, not asking permission, not acknowledging Whitfield's existence. His voice was pitched to carry without shouting, the kind of command voice that quieted rooms through sheer gravitational weight. 23 combat deployments. For Navy crosses. Twice wounded in action. He opened the file. His eyes tracked across the page. Expert-level combat medicine. Fluency in Arabic, Dari, Pashto. 12 years active duty naval intelligence. Commendation for valor at Fallujah. He paused. The silence stretched. Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett. Parishioners gasped. Someone dropped a coffee cup. It shattered against tile with a sound like breaking teeth. The general turned to face the congregation. She was placed in this parish under classified orders to monitor a network of compromised assets connected to missing military equipment from Fallujah. She maintained that cover for 11 months despite considerable hostility. Whitfield's face had turned the color of old bone. The young ranger stepped forward. His uniform fit him like war itself, perfect creases, perfect posture. He lifted his shirt. His torso bore the kind of surgical scar that only came from emergency intervention. The scar of someone who'd been opened up and stitched closed by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. I was 7 years old, the ranger said. His voice didn't shake. Military voices rarely did when they were delivering truth. Jolan District. Fallujah. My father was caught in a crossfire. I was bleeding out in the street. The Marines found me with about 4 minutes of consciousness left. He touched the scar. A Navy medic performed emergency surgery in the middle of a combat zone using field supplies and pure skill. She saved my life. He turned to look directly at Laura, even though Laura was still in the parking lot watching through rain-streaked glass. 20 years, the ranger continued. 20 years I spent becoming an army ranger. Every push-up. Every ruck march. Every night in the desert. I did it because I needed to understand what I owed her. I needed to be the kind of soldier who could say thank you without words. His eyes found hers across the parking lot and the rain and the distance between a nurse who'd been humiliated and a soldier who'd been saved twice. At 8:19 a.m., the general turned to Pastor Whitfield. The movement was small. A quarter turn. But it carried the weight of a verdict. Pastor Whitfield, the general said. His voice had dropped into a register that made lawyers start calculating bail. You terminated a federal operative during an active classified operation. You fabricated complaints to accelerate that termination. You obstructed a national security investigation. News crews had arrived. Their cameras were recording. The moment was being documented for broadcast, for posterity, for the permanent record. You redirected $347,000 in veteran housing donations into personal accounts. You conspired with a contractor to inflate repair costs while disabled veterans lived in substandard conditions. You knew those funds were compromised and did nothing. Whitfield's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. This is a mistake. I run this church. I run. You run nothing, the general said. The statement had the finality of a sentence being carried out. Effective immediately, the Diocese of San Antonio is revoking your credentials. Your pension is frozen pending criminal investigation. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say. The federal agents moved with practiced efficiency. Zip ties. Reading of rights. The smell of rain and ozone and the sharper scent of a man's authority being stripped away. Whitfield's expensive watch caught the light as his wrists were secured. His clerical collar suddenly looked like a noose. You can't do this, he said. His voice had transformed into something small and desperate. I'm a priest. I served 32 years. You served yourself, an agent said, not unkindly. The rest was performance. The diocesan bishop arrived at 8:34 a.m., his face carved from stone and conscience. He didn't greet Whitfield. He walked directly to the church office with 2 attorneys flanking him like sentries. 20 minutes later, Whitfield was defrocked. His ordination stripped. His credentials revoked. The bishop's voice, when he finally emerged, carried the weight of broken vows. You have betrayed everything. At 8:52 a.m., Laura walked into St. Anthony's Church. The room went dead silent. Not the silence of shock anymore. The silence of recognition. Her volunteer polo had been replaced by dress blues, ribbons arranged in perfect rows, every decoration earned in places most people would never see. The Master Chief insignia on her collar caught the light like a small dagger. The ranger moved toward her. His hand extended. Laura's hand met his. Neither of them spoke. Military people rarely needed to. Thank you, he said. 8 years of gratitude compressed into 2 words. You earned it, Laura replied. 4 words. A lifetime of meaning. The general approached and extended the tarnished challenge coin, the one from Fallujah, the one that connected everything. The evidence. The proof. The reason she'd been here at all. This goes in the Pentagon, the general said. Your operation dismantled a 20-year smuggling network. 17 conspirators across 3 countries. 2.3 million in recovered assets. You did what the entire intelligence community couldn't do. You stayed invisible. You stayed professional. When the moment came, you acted. Laura took the coin. Its weight in her palm was the weight of every prayer she'd sworn she didn't believe in, every moment she'd swallowed her pride while a lesser man tried to break her, every second of restraint that had been the actual mission all along. What's next? The ranger asked. Laura turned the coin over in her hands. The edges were worn smooth from 20 years of being carried by a man who didn't know what it represented. Next, she said, I disappear again. Different cover. Different church. Different city. For how long? The ranger's question carried the weight of someone who understood sacrifice. Laura looked at the coin. Then at the ranger. Then at the church around her, this place where she'd been humiliated, where she'd revealed herself, where she'd finally been seen. Until the next one needs saving, she said. By Monday, the news had gone national. The Associated Press picked it up. Cable networks ran special segments on military operatives embedded in civilian institutions. The story became about hidden strength. About what you can't see when you're too busy looking down. About the danger of assuming you know who you're standing next to. By Tuesday, Whitfield's wife filed for divorce. By Wednesday, the diocesan audit found 7 churches in the network implicated in similar embezzlement schemes. Millions of dollars in redirected funds. Disabled veterans living in substandard housing while priests lived comfortable lives. By Friday, Whitfield negotiated a plea deal. 18 months in minimum security. Forfeiture of all assets. Teaching credential retained, barely. He'd walk out of prison with nothing but a name and a memory of what he used to be. 6 months later, on a Tuesday at 7 a.m., Pastor Whitfield stood in front of 19 community college students in a classroom that smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. His khakis had come from Walmart. His shoes were discount pharmacy sale items. He demonstrated chest compressions on a plastic dummy, his voice the kind of monotone that made time move slower. "The goal is 100 compressions per minute," he said. His wedding ring was gone. His clerical collar had been replaced by a name tag that read, Instructor Whitfield. Basic life support. One student scrolled on her phone, watching a viral video. It was him being arrested. She didn't recognize him. During the break, Whitfield sat alone in his car in the parking lot, eating a gas station sandwich, staring at the steering wheel. His office was a shared cubicle with a broken desk lamp. His apartment was a studio in a converted motel where the ice machine broke every 3 weeks and nobody fixed it. Every Sunday, driving to the grocery store, he passed St. Anthony's Church. He saw the new pastor. He saw the rebuilt veteran housing units funded by recovered donations. He kept driving. Laura's voice played over the final image, rain falling on San Antonio, church bells ringing, the new parish nurse organizing her first aid station with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from having held lives together in the dark. The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together. Hit that like button now. And I need to know, would you have revealed your identity, or stayed invisible? Drop your answer below. Subscribe so you never miss a story.